Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Agricultural meteorologist Greg Soulje is back with us here today on this Friday. Welcome, Greg.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Nice to be with you. Hip, hip, hooray, and finally Friday. And tell you what, we have lots to talk about. We know these Tuesday and Friday updates tend to be kind of quick little updates, but boy, there is a lot to talk about in a short amount of time. And it is going to just, it's like pedal to the metal with regard to temperature changes over parts of the plains and Corn Belt. We've got on our hands probably a good old-fashioned extended heat wave weather pattern. Yes, a trademark of it is El Nino, but other influences are underway. But we'll talk about the big change in weather going on across a wide area of the Corn Belt and parts of the plains going forward here for the weekend and in the next week too.
Well, we'll let you get at it then.
All right, then here we go, off and running to the races. And boy, look at the cloud cover. You know, you don't see this extension of cloud cover and rain-cooled air. We're practically into July here, and daytime readings may not pass the 70-degree mark into some parts of Illinois and Indiana, where there's a pretty broad-based, albeit scattered area of shower activity. And flood watches back in effect and already down just north of about Paducah around Vincennes over the past 24 hours, another 4 inches in some of the gauges down there. Mind you, that is still a drier pocket of the southernmost sections of the Corn Belt. Meanwhile, cool air covers in many areas, and the cloud cover are pretty extensive all the way back to the central Rockies and as far east as the lower lakes region, and almost spring-like storm system that will help to build what we call the hot ridge, the hot dome. And I know other forecasters are complaining about that term hot dome. Technically not right if you were to open up a dynamic meteorology book, but it is what it is. And there is the upper charts from a west to east orientation, the upper air wind pattern, and a significant trough and upper air storm system moving in to the Pacific West. Again, pretty unusual, but again, it's an unusual summertime season going forward. There's the surface map across the country, low pressure across the plains. There's a little better reflection of it on the visible satellite picture across the plains and Midwest. And yeah, a lot of cloud cover. You can normally dissipate it. Typically you do this time of the year with the much higher sun angle, but unable to do so. The atmosphere inverted with temperatures, meaning it's warmer upper aloft, cooler at the surface. Normally it's the other way around, so it's tough to get this high and mid-level stuff scoured out. And then you're building a shower activity in that as well, which is this due to this degree that we see here, peppered up through the Dakotas, across the Great Lakes, wide areas from the eastern Corn Belt back into the eastern plains, as far south as the Ozarks. Some of the heaviest rains are down into the Ozarks, Missouri Boot Hill. It'll be that I-70 to Magic I-64 Ohio River corridor that will come up with probably 3, 4, locally up to 5 inches of rain over the next 48 to 72 hours. And there's kind of the diffuse frontal boundary extending from the lower lakes region out of the southern plains, and the first of a myriad of strengthening upper air features into the Pacific Northwest, and some shower activity where they need it with some ongoing dryness and drought into the Northeast and New England. So rain is falling over the south and southwestern half of the Corn Belt. High temperatures across many areas of the Midwest down below 80. In some spots may not even crack 70. I'm in for an official forecast time. My radio stations down there in Champaign and Danville and parts of western Indiana, I don't think they're going to get past 70 this afternoon. But at the same time, look at these surplus soil moisture levels rated adequate to surplus at 43% through Illinois, 35 to 25% anywhere between Michigan and Minnesota, and in through Iowa. So we are well watered down, and in some spots excess mode. We'll just have to see. This will be an interesting scenario going from this rain-cooled early to mid-spring-like air to a midsummer heat wave weather pattern. I know let's see, genealogy and the structure and the biology and dynamics and all that have changed over the years, but just wonder how shallow root systems for now are going to have to all of a sudden take off, sucking up moisture, going around the clock with growth and development, and keep up with the normal pace of what you're supposed to do this time of the year, and these kind of temperatures that we'll talk about in just a second. In any event, let me go back to the plain states areas here. Shower activity, some drought relief for the plain states. Of course, winter wheat harvest continuing to move on northward. There's some organized rains for parts of the spring grain belt going forward, but farther south, you can see the dismal soil moisture levels across Colorado, New Mexico, and Montana. 92% short in Colorado to 52% across South Dakota. Now onto the southern states. The showers and thunderstorms thunderstorms across Kentucky. Talked about Paducah and some of those western reaches of Kentucky and Tennessee, parts of the Mid-South. You expected to see some severe weather and heavy rainfall. Drought relief, yes. More work to go on the drought relief scene, you bet, across parts of the Mid-Atlantic region and parts of Central and South Florida. There is the drought monitor from Thursday, yesterday, still focused across the lower Mississippi Valley. It is quite the dichotomy of soil moisture from too little in the northern Delta, lower Mississippi Valley, too much into the lower Delta region, lower Mississippi Valley, inlet areas of the Mississippi River, and east from there across Cotton Belt country. Improvement, still a lot to go, and still some fires going on in the Everglades areas of Florida, and of course the worst of it through the Mid-Atlantic region. And there's a look at the snapshot of Plain States issues, and again some zeroing in on some of the dryness and drought through Florida and the Mid-Atlantic region. While back closer to home, we're still technically abnormally dry, although we had about an inch of rain in some parts of northern Illinois a couple of days ago, as well as southern Wisconsin. Should be back to normal per se, but we'll see what some of this 90 to 95 plus degree air does on soil moisture levels going forward. Cottonwood fire situation, that's in central Utah. It is a time of the year where you get these dry-based thunderstorms. You can build tower and cumulus clouds. The atmosphere is dry. Underneath it, you get some gusty winds with the updraft and downdraft. You dry out those rains, if you will, but you still get lightning strikes going. And that's how you get the fires going this time of the year in the early stages of the monsoon season in the southwestern parts of the country. So Utah, Four Corners area will have to be watched going forward. But there should be some significant drought relief in an almost spring-like storm. I have some snow in the forecast on this week in agribusiness, some of the higher peaks of northern and central Colorado, the Bitterroot chain, maybe parts of the Wasatch and the Cascades, but probably somewhere above about 7,000 or 7,500 feet, which you don't get this time of the year, but that's the strength of the cold air storm moving into the Pacific Northwest. So that big trough downstream is where we're at. And that position is a ridge position, and it's going to intensify at least the sinking aspect of the atmosphere. And so we get one of these big compressional warming heat waves that, at least for now, are tempered by temperatures that are pretty comfortable into the 60s and 70s. Not great for corn and soybeans, but recovered to the 70s and low to mid 80s. And some of that heat you can see in the southern plains beginning to work northward. There's almost a teleconnection between the hot ridge over the southwestern or the southeastern part of the country, the Atlantic, and you go all the way into, I believe, Western Europe. Those folks, for the big soccer buffs taking their ranch dressing back with them, are experiencing a heat wave out there towards Britain and some of the western reaches of Europe. So there's a teleconnection, a lining up of some of this heat from one part of the hemisphere to the next hemisphere. Anyway, severe weather this afternoon, Oklahoma and the Panhandle reaches into the Ozarks, up into parts of Big Sky Country, Mid-Atlantic region for the day tomorrow. There are the fire concerns up there in a critical to extreme category. That's as high as you can go. And so there are big time issues going on through Arizona, especially Utah and sections of the Western Four Corners region. And then that beat continues on here for the back end of the weekend as well. So that will be the headline story. And I think we've talked about that on previous get-togethers here the past several months, that with time, the focus of fires, which were in the plains and the southeast, would shift down westward into the southwestern parts of the country. In any event, there's not much going on other than these scattered, dry-based, more lightning-based thunderstorms in the southwest. You can see a pretty snappy system into the Pacific Northwest, and the organized rains as far north as about the Kankakee, south past the Ohio, into parts of Kentucky and Tennessee through this afternoon and evening time. And again, multi-inch rains are expected there. Some grounds are still too wet. There's reports of standing water, a little yellowing in some of the fields that we're hearing out of east central Illinois. And the red areas in western Texas, severe weather, and up through parts of Big Sky Country as well. In those areas of the country, you tend to get more hail than tornadic activity and real high winds. So that's something that has to be watched a lot of times on cattle as well, in particular, some of those larger hailstorm outbreaks. Saturday morning, unsettled in the Pacific Northwest. Thunderstorms are getting going into the northern plains. The organized wet weather continues into the eastern Corn Belt. And we kind of switch things around here. At least there's some organized rains in the Mid-Atlantic region. And that boundary, that half circle red area that extends across Missouri into Nebraska, up across the parts of the Dakotas, south of there, that's at least the expansion up aloft of the atmosphere that sinks the air. Well, of course, folks in an engine shop, if you compress a gas in an engine, you heat it up, Same with the atmosphere under the right circumstances. And the showers and thunderstorms, a little more scattered. There may be a couple of gusty thunderstorms in the parts of Illinois, upper Mississippi Valley, Western Lakes region between Saturday night and Sunday morning, as that warm front and some wind involved as well begins to work its way into the picture. This will be Atlantic and Gulf moisture and moisture off these overtly wet soils over some sections of the Corn Belt that are going to really pop these dew points. Trying to remember the professor from the Illinois State Water Survey who did, Stanley Chengman, who did a investigation maybe 30 years ago. This could be, and it's early in the season, but we could actually start putting moisture back in despite the early growth stage of corn and soybeans, especially the corn side, put moisture back in from those rapidly developing fields. We'll just have to see how this plays out around here. This kind of heat all of a sudden on wet grounds, shallow root systems, etc., so forth and so on. There's the wet weather the next 48 hours, an inch or two or three, south of Champaign, Danville, Indianapolis, Columbus, down into Kentucky, and some organized range you can see in through big sky country. It's parts of the southern grain areas of Canada and up across the Dakotas as well. Scattered stuff across the plains. Got to watch the cattle and livestock, space them out, water them down. It's a phrase I kick around probably too much on the radio, but it's the truth. You'll need proper ventilation, water, etc., in some of these feedlot and shelter areas going forward here with the heat building across the plains and Corn Belt. So Monday, big upper air trough in the west. In the east, across the Corn Belt, big upper level high, 594. The commodity guys, when you talk about 588, it brings about a worry in their thoughts about dryness and drought. So this is heat, and this is 95 to near 100 degree heat. Someone's going to hit on it a couple of times next week across the Midwest, and it just stays there. There's no real movement of that high as systems continue to move into the west. So unsettled, stormy, rainy, mountain snow, all that unusual for the time of year across the Pacific Northwest. And kind of unusual. You get these heat waves really more or less into mid to late July, early August on this kind of scale. But it'll be around, so we'll see how fast soil moisture depletes and how much drought begins to return. I think we're not completely done with that. And ultimately, I think we're going to swing the pendulum in the other direction. I know on other get-togethers, we've talked about growing degree day units. We think there's going to be a lack. We'll catch up for now. Still think we've got some much cooler and colder than average days here on the back end of summertime. So again, this is probably going to be an anomaly for what the rest of the summertime season plays out. But in the short term, certainly pay heed to the hot and humid weather. And there's not much to go on really to speak of on the weather maps. The chart systems are in the west. The plain states, a couple of frontal boundaries winding their way through. They will not have the ability to knock down the ridge. The atmosphere is too warm to bubble it up, to make thunderstorm activity. That's another why we call it a hot dome, a capped atmosphere. You just can't get all that humidity at the surface to rise and make clouds and make thunderstorm activity because it is just equally as warm and hot up aloft, relatively speaking. So you can't get buoyancy. You can't get thunderstorms. You may bubble one up or two, but that's about it. So the thinking that, oh, it's hot and humid, we'll have afternoon thunderstorms, not the case in this particular setup. This is the organized rains moving through. This is the next 7 days. Again, the bulk of this is the next 48 to 72 hours across the central and southern Corn Belt. Look, Canada and parts of the Dakotas, big sky country, and there's at least some rain in the forecast down through parts of Florida. Would be surprised we get maybe a little tropical system. We have it on this week's weather maps and charts for the TV show. That system may come up again like Arthur, but in the Western Gulf, shallow waters. That's hot water down there, literally, and move into the Rio Grande. And that's the system that you see down through Old Mexico at some point, the middle or late portions of next week. So heat wave across the middle part of the country, hot weather, 100-degree readings, and those are going to translate east, I think. Heads up in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. There's someone for a couple of 2 or 3 days will hit 100. The heat index value is 105 to 115. That is just virtually unbearable. So try to plan your more strenuous chores and livestock duties for the cooler late night, early morning hours, and repeat it back sometime at night and early morning. So you're kind of almost working a shift opposite of the way the sun comes up and comes down because of the heat involved. In stark contrast to the heat, it's a spring storm moving in to the Pacific Northwest, 1 to 2 inches of moisture into southern Canada, the Rockies, the Plain States, 1 to 3 across the Central Plains, across the Mid-Atlantic region from the system moving through currently. And so that's the story there on the extended. Here are temperatures for the day tomorrow. Still cool across the Midwest. There's the heat building across the high plains, and there it is. Readings probably 95 to 100 on Sunday around the Corn Palace Sioux Empire region. So just think and look at that brighter red area, mid to upper 90s here in northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. Someone around here in a drier spot's going to get to 100 at some point, mid to late next week. Mid 90s as far north as northern sections of Wisconsin. Into Michigan, you can see the heat expanded. It's reversed. It's hotter in the mid latitudes and up near the Canadian border than it will be down south along the Gulf Coast. That is a typical hot ridge setup that is materializing over the middle part of the country. This is Thursday, and there's just no change really going forward. We may get some easing of temperatures over the 4th of July holiday, and this is perhaps the right way to look at it from the upper chart standpoint, the 6 to 10 day outlook from the Feds. That's a general right idea. I'm not going to squibble over this. Trough of the West, hot ridge, which is just this time of the year. It is tough to break that thing down. Not that it won't be, and that we don't have a significant colder back end of summer from our thinking. But until then, and again, El Nino, dominant El Nino, but not all driven by El Nino. Keep that in the back of your mind. Next 6 to 10 days, that's pretty much the story. We'll go into the 4th of July with readings pushing 90 or higher into much of the Corn Belt, if not 95 and higher. And any organized rains, and it's tough to combat that hot ridge, might be a little overdone, maybe too optimistic for near normal across the Corn Belt. And parts of the plains would agree with. Probably most of the action is into the tropical potential, Rio Grande, parts of Texas and the Pacific Northwest. Next 2 weeks, a little westward retrogression. We could spend another 5 or 10 minutes talking about this, but the winds, the lines that are coming across the Great Lakes, they're dipping southward. Evident we're just going to kind of propagate that hot ridge westward, retrogression. Yes, the weather backs up to the west. I think my maps might even move that way this weekend on the TV show. And it all just tough to give the idea that we're going to ultimately bring down and move the ridge back to the west, get more cooling, and with time, more substantial cooling into the Corn Belt and points out of the east. But that's probably 2 weeks to 3 weeks out for openers. Into July, above average, and that we don't have a difference of thinking there. That's about the right idea. And this is the right idea as well. The rains are going to come to a screeching halt, not just wind down. They're going to come to a halt. Because these transitions back into cooler sometimes are not met. Well, you'll get a couple of fronts, nice drop in temperatures, more comfortable outdoor work, easy on livestock, etc., so forth and so on. You sometimes don't get organized rains in the transition back to cooler weather. This would be mid to late July we're thinking of. So we have a kind of a conundrum of heat. We've got great soil moisture, excess soil moisture, but the thinking going forward is not very positive in a moisture standpoint across the middle part of the country. I believe our next update, the half-hour get-together, is Tuesday. We're going to do these on Tuesdays now, July 21st at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's the thinking from the weather office. Hot, humid, miserable, sticky, uncomfortable. You wanted summertime, you're going to get summertime. Don't complain about it. Not you. I don't want to hear complaints. It's too hot out there because it's, not going to get past 60 in my part of the world this afternoon. So there.
You're always full of good news, but yeah, next week is going to get,
they call me,
get a little hot.
Calls me gloom and doom.
Well, thank you so much for the update, Greg, and we'll be checking in with you next week to see if we actually are hot and humid or where it's trending and when we might get some relief. We appreciate that. So
anytime.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in as well.